Hi, this is the fifth of a series of videos on the book of Daniel. Up till now, what we've been doing is the practical stories of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, and we're seeing them stay righteous and loyal to God despite all kinds of pressures that are put on them. That's Daniel's 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, in this lesson, I'm planning on doing both Daniel 5 and Daniel 6. Daniel 5 is the very, very famous story of the writing on the wall. We know the exact date this happens because at the very end it mentions that night Belshazzar was killed and the Babylonian kingdom was taken over by the Medes. We're talking about Cyrus, and this is recorded by the historian Herodotus. The date is October 12th, 539 BC. Daniel has been in captivity for 67 years at this point. He's still faithful to God. So anyway, what happens is the king, whose name was Belshazzar, calls for a banquet, a huge party, and they're all getting drunk, and he makes a very foolish but faithful decision. His decision is to bring in the goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and they're making toasts to the kings of different idols in wine, in these goblets. Verse 3, so they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. Very bad choice. What happened is at that moment, an actual hand appeared and started writing on the wall. And the words were Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, which was Persian. And Belshazzar was terrified, shaking, turned pale, because he realized this was against him for what he'd been doing. So what he does is he calls for all his magicians and astrologers and wise men and says, hey, tell me what these words mean. They said, hey, we don't know. And now he's even more afraid. He says, if you'll tell me the meaning, I'll give you purple robes and you'll be made the third highest in the kingdom. Here's a question. Why the third highest in the kingdom? Why not the second highest? Well, here's why. Now, as I've said earlier, the skeptics believe that Daniel was written after the events, which would explain the explicit prophecies, which is absurd, as we'll see, because of the prophecies in the first century. But anyway, so they say that this is a story. Herodotus and other Greek historians say the last king of Babylon was a guy named Nabonidus. Never even mentioned Belshazzar. So the critics say, it's just a story made up. Daniel's the fable. But then they found an inscription in a ziggurat, a huge square building in Ur, and the inscription mentions, guess who? Belshazzar. It turns out that Nabopolassar had a palace coup in which he had the former king Evil-Merodach killed. He took the throne, but he was not a legitimate ruler. He was not related to Nebuchadnezzar. So what he did was he married the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, therefore legitimizing his son, whose name was Belshazzar. Now, but because Belshazzar was a legitimate heir, he made him a regent, sort of a co-ruler, so that Belshazzar was the second in the kingdom, which would explain why he offered the third place in the kingdom. Now, according to the accounts, Nabopolassar wasn't that interested in ruling. He was into mysticism. He was going off into the desert. And really, effectively, the ruler of Babylon throughout this time was Belshazzar. So, here you go. The Bible, accurate. Other histories, turns out, they're not wrong. They just are incomplete, and Daniel provides the details that they don't have. Now, you would think that these critics would say, yeah, you know what? I guess we're wrong. Maybe Daniel's accurate. Of course, they never do that. So anyway, so the king was totally terrified, but it says his queen, but it's really the queen mother, which is the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, says, hey, there's a guy who worked for Nebuchadnezzar. His name was Daniel. He was a Jew, and he interpreted dreams, and he was relied on by the king. Apparently, Daniel's still around, but he's been sort of shoved to the sidelines by the likes of Nabopolassar and Belshazzar. So they bring Daniel in, and they offer him the third place in the kingdom. Let's read how that goes. Then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty, a greatness, and glory and splendor. And basically what he does is, he says, I'm gonna interpret the writing for you, but he rebuked Belshazzar, a bold man. He says, Nebuchadnezzar, he gave honor to Jehovah. And he wouldn't have done a thing like this to have a drunken feast and disrespect the God of Israel. So anyway, he says, but I'm going to interpret it. Mene means measured. Tekel means lacking. Parsin means divided. So here's the interpretation. You, Belshazzar, have been weighed in the balance by God. You've been found wanting, and your kingdom will be taken from you and given to the divided kingdom of the Persians and the Medes. And here's what happened. Verse 29, then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Bad idea to disrespect the God of heaven. Good idea to be like Daniel, who fearlessly rebuked the king and interpreted the writing. You know what? Being the third highest in the kingdom was probably not a great honor that night, because the bottom line is the second highest was killed. I would imagine they considered killing Daniel, but they didn't. In fact, we know that because he came to serve this guy Darius. That brings us to Daniel chapter 6, where we meet Darius the Mede. Now, who is this guy? Now, the Persian Mede Empire was quite unusual. It's like a dual empire where there are always two effective kings. One was the chief king. The other one was kind of a sub-king, if you will. For many years, the Medians were the main rulers and the Persians were the lesser rulers. But with Cyrus, who was this general who conquered great kingdoms, with Cyrus, the Persians were the top dogs and the Medes were sort of lesser. So apparently what they did was they gave to Darius the Mede, the largest province of the Mede-Persian Empire, which would have been Babylon. He ruled over that. There were 120 satraps. Now, it turns out historians have never identified for sure who this guy is. There's somebody named Astyages the Medes, who he might be, or he just might be a person who never entered the records. We don't know. But as usual, the critics say, well, obviously Daniel doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just a fable. No, this is the same guy who got the Belshazzar right and the third place in the kingdom right. No, I believe Darius and the Mede is a real character. By the way, there was another emperor, Darius, who succeeded Darius and Cambyses, but that's not who we're talking about. He was Persian. Anyway, so what our friend Darius does is he sets up 120 provinces with satraps over each of those provinces. And then he has 4 administrators who oversee all that, take in the tax money, deal with interactions with these people. We don't know exactly what they did. One of them was Daniel. Daniel was different though, because in ancient times, as many places now, there's a lot of corruption. People taking kickbacks, bribes, they're enriching one another. Hey, I help you, you help me. Satraps give money to the leaders, they take money. But Daniel, he's not corrupt. You can't bribe him. And he's making him look bad. In fact, Darius says, Daniel is honest. I'm going to make him the chief of all the kingdom. And they were jealous. So they said, we got to take this Daniel guy out. Now, what are we going to do? What are we going to use against him? Now, it's so awesome what they said. Verse 4 of chapter 6. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. This is awesome. Imagine being such an amazing worker that all your co-workers, whether they're righteous or not, say, this person is never, ever negligent and is never corrupt in any way. You know, I like to think that I'm not particularly negligent and not particularly corrupt, But can I honestly say, in my entire 34 years, I've never done anything that was negligent or corrupt, ever? I don't know. But that's Daniel. And here they're in their evil minds, they're saying, well, how are we going to get him then? I know. He is so righteous. He's so worshiping of God. Let's use that to trap him. So they go to Darius, and they're using two things. Number one, Daniel's honesty and his sincere loyalty to God. And number two, Darius's pride. Hey, they say, Darius, you're awesome. You're amazing. You know what we should do? We should declare that nobody can pray to any god but you for 30 days. Now, Darius doesn't realize that he's being trapped. He's thinking, yeah, you know, I'm pretty great guy. That would be really kind of get people to worship me. Sure, let's go for it. So they put it in writing. But Darius forgot something. Apparently, the Persian Mede Empire had some sort of constitutional checks and balances because, according to what we can see here, if a king issued a decree, even he himself could not just simply get rid of it. So the bottom line is, once he signed this decree, if anyone were to pray anytime in the next 30 days, they'd be thrown into the lion's den. These hypocrites. Now look what happened. Verse 10. Now when Daniel learned the decree had been published, he went to his upstairs room and he prayed in secret so he would not get in trouble. No, that's not what he did. With the windows open toward Jerusalem, 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Excuse me. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Darius, he was ticked. He realized they had used him. These hypocrites who were losing their place because they were corrupt, they were basically manipulating him into signing this decree. He was foolish. He had nobody to blame but himself. So he said, that's right, we're going to have to go with that. So they drag in Daniel, they throw him into the lion's den, and they seal it up. Let's read what happened there. Verse 17, a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of the nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Wouldn't that be great if your neighbors, if your co-workers realize that you serve God continuously? He loved Daniel. And he spent a sleepless night. I assume normally he had lots of entertainment and lots of food. None of that, because he was just praying. I believe he was probably praying to Jehovah, praying for Daniel's deliverance. And it happened. He got delivered. So he gave me this explanation. Oops, sorry about that. I was reading chapter 7. Chapter 6, verse 21. Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, O majesty. The king was overjoyed. He gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. You know, I don't know if we can consider a promise that we'll never be hurt if we trust in our God. In fact, I don't think the story has changed significantly, even if Daniel had been killed by the lions. But the fact is, he wasn't. It must have been an interesting night in that lion's den. Daniel on one side, the lions on the other, licking their paws or whatever lions do. And they were hungry. They kept them hungry. One of the reasons I know that is that when the king was able to rescue Daniel, he was so ticked. So he took those 3 rulers who had manipulated him and tried to use Daniel's religion against him. And they were thrown into the lion's den, and they were pounced upon immediately by those lions. God is powerful. God is in control. God rules the nations. Do you believe that? Are you so confident that God rules the nations that you're willing to do what Daniel did? You will never be corrupt. You will never be negligent. And when the opportunity comes and you're able to show your loyalty to God, you'll do it. Daniel, who was willing to be killed by Belshazzar, who rebuked him. Daniel, who was honest and who the king knew never did anything against him. That's Daniel. Let's be like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Thank you very much. Okay, did it finally work? Let's see.